My son left for work one Tuesday morning and never came home. For over 2 decades, I lived with one burning question. Where was my boy? I traveled 48 states, spent our life savings, and watched my wife's heart break a little more each day. Every phone ring carried hope. Every knock on the door might be him coming home. 26 years of searching, praying, and never giving up hope. Then one evening, 26 years later, I saw his face on the evening news. What I discovered that night left me stunned. Before I tell you what I discovered about my son that night, tell me where you're watching this from and hit subscribe. This story will change how you think about family forever. Let me take you back to March 15th, 1999. It started as an ordinary Tuesday morning on our ranch in Ohio. I woke up at 5:30 hearing Max moving around downstairs in the kitchen. That boy was always an early riser, just like his mother. When I came down, the smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. Jasmine was at the stove, her graying hair in that familiar ponytail, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Morning, honey," she said with that warm smile that had kept me going through 26 years of marriage. "Max is already dressed and ready." Max sat at our old wooden kitchen table, the same one Jasmine's father had built back in '62. He was 24 then, tall and broad-shouldered from ranch work and his job at Henderson's sawmill. His dark hair was combed neat, wearing his favorite blue and green flannel shirt. "Morning," he said curtly, barely looking up from his coffee. "Henderson wants those oak logs finished today." We shared pancakes and bacon while country music played softly on the radio. Max ate in silence, mostly giving short answers when Jasmine tried to make conversation about his work. She asked about the crew and reminded him to be careful around the machinery. "Weather's supposed to turn later," she said, glancing at the gray March sky. "Might get some rain." "Yeah, whatever," Max replied with a shrug. "It's just weather." Jasmine packed his lunch in the old metal lunchbox he'd carried since high school. 2 turkey sandwiches, an apple, and a thermos of coffee, exactly how he liked it. She'd made that same lunch for 6 years since he started at the sawmill, though he rarely thanked her for it. Max stood up and gave his mother a quick peck on the cheek, then shook my hand briefly. "See you tonight, I guess." "We love you, son," I said, trying to bridge the distance I'd been feeling from him lately. "Yeah, sure," he replied flatly. "I'll be back." I followed him to the front door and watched as he climbed into his blue Ford pickup, the one we'd bought together when he turned 21. The engine rumbled to life, and he backed out of our gravel driveway without looking back at us. Jasmine joined me on the front porch, and I could see the worry in her eyes. Max had been growing more distant over the past few months, more cold somehow. But we told ourselves it was just him becoming a man, finding his independence. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of spring rain still hours away. Max didn't wave. He just drove off down our gravel road. I watched until his truck disappeared around the bend where our gravel road met the county highway. 6 o'clock came and went that Tuesday evening. You have to understand, Max was the most reliable person I knew. In 24 years, that boy had never missed a family dinner without calling first. That's why when the kitchen clock struck 6 and his chair sat empty, Jasmine and I exchanged worried glances. She had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite pot roast, the same recipe her mother had taught her. The smell of tender beef and vegetables filled our farmhouse, mixing with fresh-baked cornbread, cooling on the counter. Everything was ready, waiting for our son to walk through that front door. "Maybe he's running late finishing those oak logs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know how Henderson can be about deadlines." Jasmine nodded, but I could see concern creeping into her brown eyes. She walked to the kitchen window facing our driveway, pressing her face against the glass. 6:30 came and went. By 7 o'clock, I checked the garage for the 3rd time. But the space was empty, marked only by the oil stain that had been there since Max first started driving. "I'm calling Henderson's," Jasmine announced, her voice tight with worry. She dialed the number, letting it ring until the answering machine picked up. The sawmill had closed at 5, same as always. By 8 o'clock, we sat across from each other at our kitchen table, staring at 3 place settings. The pot roast had stopped steaming. The mashed potatoes had formed a skin on top. The green beans sat cold and lifeless. "This isn't like him," Jasmine whispered, hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. "Even when he's been distant lately, he's never just not come home." I knew she was right. Despite Max's recent coldness, he was still our son. Still the boy who'd never broken curfew, who'd always kept his word about when he'd be home. "I'm driving the route," I announced. Maybe he had truck trouble. The March evening was cold and damp as I climbed into my Chevy and started down the county highway. Max traveled twice daily. I drove slowly, scanning both sides for any sign of his blue Ford. I checked every pull-off, every side road. Nothing. I stopped at Miller's gas station, the only place between our ranch and the sawmill, open past dark. Old Pete Miller was behind the counter. "Haven't seen your boy today?" he said before I could ask. "Usually stops by for a Coke around 4:30. Never showed." By 11 o'clock I was back home. Jasmine was still sitting by that kitchen window, her silhouette outlined against the yellow porch light we'd left burning. She looked up when I walked in, hope and fear battling in her expression. I shook my head. We spent that night taking turns by the window, listening for tires on gravel that never came. Every creak of the old house made us jump. Every distant car engine made our hearts race. When dawn broke on March 16th and Max's bed remained unslept in, we finally faced the truth. That's when fear truly crept into our hearts. I drove to the sawmill first thing Wednesday morning. I needed to retrace my son's steps to find where he might have gone. Sleep hadn't come easy that night, and by 5:30 I was already dressed and heading out the door. Jasmine was still in her robe, clutching a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Bring him home," she whispered as I kissed her goodbye. Henderson's sawmill sat on 15 acres just outside Millerville, surrounded by stacks of lumber and the constant smell of fresh cut wood. I arrived at 7 sharp, just as the morning shift was starting up. The sound of chainsaws and heavy machinery filled the air, but all I could think about was finding someone who'd seen Max yesterday. Jim Peterson, the floor supervisor, was a good man who'd known our family for years. When he saw me walking toward his office, his face immediately grew serious. "Jasper," he said, removing his hard hat, "what brings you here so early?" "Max didn't come home last night, Jim. I need to know what happened after he left yesterday." Jim's weathered face creased with concern. "He worked his regular shift, nothing unusual. Helped the crew finish those oak logs we've been cutting for the Columbus job. Clocked out at 4:30, same as always." "Did he say where he was going? Mention stopping anywhere?" "Not to me. Let me ask the boys." We walked out to the main floor, where Max's crew was already at work. These were men who'd known my son since he started it at the mill 6 years ago. They stopped their saws when they saw us approaching. "Any of you talked to Max yesterday after work?" Jim asked. Bobby Martinez, a young guy about Max's age, spoke up first. "He seemed normal, Mr. Montrose. Maybe a little quiet, but Max has been that way lately. Didn't say nothing about plans." He walked to his truck around 4:35. Added Tom Wheeler, an older man with kind eyes. I saw him from the loading dock. Truck started up fine, and he headed toward the main road. I walked over to the employee parking area where Max always left his blue Ford. The space was empty now, filled by someone else's vehicle. I stared at the gravel patch where his truck should have been, as if looking hard enough might make it appear. The drive from Henderson's back toward our ranch took me through downtown Millerville. I stopped at every place Max might have gone. Miller's diner, where he sometimes grabbed coffee. Murphy's gas station, where he filled up twice a week. The hardware store, the bank, even the little grocery where Jasmine shopped. Nobody had seen him. At Miller's, the waitress. Sarah shook her head sadly. "Max usually comes in Wednesdays for pie, but he never showed yesterday. I even saved him a slice of apple, thinking he was running late." Murphy's was the same story. Old Murphy himself was working the register and knew Max by name. "That boy's regular as clockwork. Fills up every Tuesday and Friday. When he didn't come by yesterday, I figured maybe he was running low on cash. By noon, I'd covered every road between the sawmill and home twice. I'd talked to shopkeepers, gas station attendants, and anyone else who might have crossed paths with my son. The answer was always the same. Nobody had seen Max after he left Henderson's. When I walked back into our kitchen, Jasmine looked up from the table where she'd been sitting with the same cold cup of coffee. The hope in her eyes died when she saw my empty hands. "Nothing," I said quietly. She put her face in her hands and began to cry. That evening, as darkness fell and Max's chair remained empty for the second night, I made a decision that would change everything. I knew then that something terrible had happened. Thursday morning, I walked into the county sheriff's office. Filing that missing person report was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It made Max's disappearance real in a way that our private searching hadn't. When you tell the law that your son is missing, you're admitting that something has gone seriously wrong. Sheriff Williams was a decent man in his 50s who'd served our county for nearly 20 years. His office smelled of old coffee and cigarettes with filing cabinets lining every wall. When I explained why I was there, he pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it to a blank missing person report. "Let's start with the basics." he said, pen ready. Full name, age, physical description. Max Montrose, 24 years old, 6'2", about 180 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. Sheriff Williams wrote everything down methodically. Then came the harder questions. Any debts? Gambling problems, girlfriend troubles? None that I know of. Max has always been responsible with money. He's been single for about 6 months, but the breakup was mutual. Any reason he might want to disappear? Arguments at home, problems at work. I thought about Max's recent coldness, his distant behavior, but that hardly seemed like reason enough to vanish completely. He's been withdrawn lately, but nothing serious. Sheriff, my son, isn't the type to just run off. Something's happened to him. Williams nodded and took the photograph I'd brought, Max smiling at last year's county fair. He also wrote down the details of Max's blue Ford pickup, 1992 model, Ohio license plate, HBK 479. We'll start with hospitals and morgues, Williams said, then expand outward. The first week they searched within a 50-mile radius. Deputies drove every back road, checked every ravine. They contacted hospitals in 3 counties, morgues in 5. They put out a bolo alert for Max's pickup truck. Nothing. The second week they expanded to neighboring states. Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky. The thinking was maybe Max had decided to start over somewhere new that he'd surface when his money ran out. Still nothing. Week 3 brought interviews. Sheriff Williams and Deputy Martinez came to our house asking about Max's friends, his habits, his state of mind. They talked to everyone at Henderson's sawmill, went through Max's locker, checked his time card records. Your son was reliable, Deputy Martinez told us. Never missed work, never caused trouble. Everyone said the same thing. Max Montrose was a good kid who kept his word. The 4th week was the hardest. Search teams combed the woods around Henderson's sawmill, dragged Miller's Creek and the Tuscarawas River. Volunteers from town joined the effort, walking shoulder to shoulder through thick brush and muddy fields. They found nothing. No trace of Max, no sign of his truck, no clue about where he might have gone. By April, the daily searches had stopped. Sheriff Williams still took my calls, still promised they were working the case, but I could hear resignation creeping into his voice. Jasper, he said during one conversation, I have to be honest with you. After this much time with no leads, we might have to classify this as a cold case. That doesn't mean we stop looking, but he didn't need to finish. I knew what he meant, but I refused to give up on my son. When the police search slowed down, our neighbors stepped up. I learned what it means to have a community rally around your family. In small-town Ohio, people don't just stand by when one of their own is hurting. They roll up their sleeves and get to work. It started with Martha Henderson, Jim's wife from the sawmill. She showed up at our door on a Saturday morning in early May with a casserole and a determined look in her eyes. We're organizing search parties for the weekends, she announced. Every Saturday and Sunday until we find that boy. The whole town's talking about it. By the following Saturday, 30 volunteers had gathered in our front yard. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, retirees, people I'd known for decades, and some I'd never met before. They came with maps, flashlights, and a shared determination to bring Max home. We'll cover every square mile within a 100-mile radius, if we have to, declared Bob Miller from the diner. That boy's one of ours. Martha had also contacted her cousin, who worked at a print shop in Canton. By Monday, we had our first batch of missing person flyers. 1,000 copies with Max's photograph and our phone number printed in bold letters. We spent that week taping them to every telephone pole store window and bulletin board from Millerville to Akron. The response was immediate. WKBN Channel 27, our local news station, called that Wednesday wanting to do a story. The reporter, a young woman named Lisa Chen, came to our house with a cameraman and spent 2 hours interviewing Jasmine and me on our front porch. Someone out there knows something, she said as they packed up their equipment. Television reaches people that flyers can't. She was right. The story aired that Friday evening, and our phones started ringing almost immediately. A trucker thought he'd seen a blue Ford at a rest stop near Youngstown. A gas station attendant in Pennsylvania was sure a young man matching Max's description had bought cigarettes and coffee 3 days earlier. That Pennsylvania lead seemed promising enough that I drove 6 hours through pouring rain to check it out. The gas station attendant was certain. Brown hair, about 6'2", polite but quiet. He even remembered the blue pickup truck, but when I showed him Max's photograph, his face fell. Oh no, sir, this wasn't your boy. The fellow I saw was older, maybe 35, and he had a beard. Another dead end. By July, we'd printed 2,000 more flyers and expanded our reach into Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. The volunteers kept coming every weekend, walking through cornfields and checking abandoned barns. Martha Henderson had turned our search into a well-organized operation with grid maps and check-in procedures. In September, I appeared on WTAM's morning talk show in Cleveland. The host, a compassionate man named Dave Reynolds, gave me 20 minutes to tell Max's story to his statewide audience. I talked about the morning he left, about the search efforts, about how a family never stops hoping. If anyone out there has seen Max Montrose or his blue Ford pickup, please call the number on your screen, Reynolds said as we wrapped up. A father's heart is breaking, and your call might be the one that brings this young man home. The phone rang 50 times over the next 3 days. 50 people who thought they might have seen something, might have met someone who looked like Max, might have information that could help. 50 more disappointments. Christmas came and went without celebration. Jasmine couldn't bear to put up a tree, and I couldn't argue with her. How do you celebrate when your family isn't whole? As we entered the new millennium, Max was still gone. The new century brought new hope, but also deeper heartache. I want you to understand what it's like to live in limbo for years. Every morning you wake up wondering if today will be the day you get answers. Every phone ring makes your heart race. Every knock on the door carries the weight of possibility. But as months turn into years, that hope becomes both a blessing and a curse. In early 2000, I made a decision that would drain our savings, but felt necessary at the time. I hired a private investigator named Frank Morrison, a former Cleveland police detective, who specialized in missing persons cases. Frank was expensive, $500 a day plus expenses, but he promised to bring fresh eyes to Max's disappearance. Sometimes families are too close to see the obvious clues, he told me during our first meeting. I'll find patterns the local police might have missed. For 6 months, Frank followed leads across 3 states. He interviewed Max's high school friends, tracked down his ex-girlfriend who'd moved to Pittsburgh, and even investigated a tip about someone matching Max's description working construction in West Virginia. Every lead turned into another dead end, and by summer, our savings account was empty. The following year, I sold 50 head of cattle, half our herd, to keep the search going. Jasmine protested at first, worried about our financial future, but I couldn't give up. That money funded more flyers, more phone calls, more trips, chasing shadows across the Midwest. By 2003, something had changed in Jasmine. I'd catch her sitting at the kitchen table, having full conversations with Max's high school graduation photo. She'd tell him about her day, ask him about his work, even set a place for him at dinner some nights. "He can hear me," she'd say when I gently suggested she put the photo away. A mother knows when her child is listening. 2005 brought official confirmation of what we'd suspected for months. Sheriff Williams called to inform us that Max's case had been formally classified as cold. Active investigation had ceased, though they assured us the file would remain open. "We haven't given up," Williams said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "If new evidence surfaces, we'll pursue it aggressively." New evidence never surfaced. By 2006, Jasmine had developed an obsession with staying home. She refused to visit her sister in Columbus, wouldn't even drive into town for groceries. Her reasoning was always the same. What if Max comes home and we're not here? What if he thinks we abandoned him? Our neighbors, who had been so supportive in the early years, gradually stopped mentioning Max. His name became taboo in casual conversation, as if speaking it might cause us more pain. People meant well, but their silence felt like another kind of loss. 2009 was when I first noticed Jasmine's hands shaking. She'd lost 30 pounds and barely slept through the night. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she jumped at every unexpected sound. The woman who'd once been the heart of our home was disappearing before my eyes. "She's suffering from chronic anxiety and severe depression," Dr. Patterson explained after Jasmine's first real medical evaluation in years. "The prolonged stress has taken a serious toll on her cardiovascular system as well. The heart problems started small, shortness of breath, chest pain during physical exertion. But by 2010, Jasmine was taking 3 different medications and visiting the cardiologist monthly. The night she collapsed in our kitchen, clutching her chest and gasping for air, I knew we'd reached a turning point. As the ambulance rushed her to the hospital, I realized a terrible truth. I was losing my wife to the same mystery that took my son. Jasmine passed away on a cold February morning in 2012. Losing her felt like losing Max all over again. I found her in our bed, peaceful, and still her hand clutching Max's senior portrait against her chest. Even in death, she couldn't let go of our boy. The funeral was small and quiet. A handful of neighbors, some folks from church, and Jasmine's sister from Columbus. What broke my heart was the empty chair I'd placed next to the casket. Max's chair waiting for a son who would never fill it. By May, I'd made a decision that surprised everyone. I sold the ranch, all 300 acres that had been in Jasmine's family, for 4 generations. Used the money to buy a 1998 Winnebago from a dealer in Canton. "Where exactly are you going?" asked Jasmine's sister, Martha. "Everywhere," I replied. "Max is out there somewhere, and I'm going to find him." The road became my home for the next 13 years. I drove through 48 states, following every lead, chasing every possibility. In Montana, I met a truck driver who swore he'd picked up a hitchhiker matching Max's description. In Florida, a motel clerk was certain a young man with Max's build had stayed there before disappearing again. Every lead ended the same way, with disappointment. From 2012 to 2015, I covered 32 states. I kept detailed records in a spiral notebook, dates, locations, people I'd spoken to. The notebook grew thick with false hopes and dead ends. I learned to live cheaply. Parked the Winnebago in Walmart lots and truck stops. Ate canned soup and peanut butter sandwiches. When I needed money, I'd find odd jobs. Painting fences, cleaning gutters, helping farmers during harvest. People were generally kind to an old man with a sad story. By 2020, my body was telling me to slow down. Arthritis in my knees made walking painful. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, especially driving at night. The Winnebago's engine was making whirring sounds, and I couldn't afford major repairs. In 2021, I admitted defeat, at least temporarily. I drove to Tucson, Arizona, drawn by the warm weather and low cost of living. Found a small apartment in a complex that catered to retirees. Even settled in Arizona, I couldn't completely let go. Once a month, I'd call the National Missing Persons Database, give them Max's information, ask if anything new had come in. The answer was always the same, polite no. I kept Max's photo on my kitchen table next to the salt and pepper shakers. Sometimes I'd talk to it while eating dinner, telling him about my day, about the desert sunsets, about how much his mother had loved him. By 2025, I was 75 years old and tired in ways I'd never imagined possible. My hair had gone completely white. My hands shook when I held my coffee cup, and I'd developed a persistent cough that worried my doctor. For the first time in 26 years, I stopped actively searching. I had made peace with never knowing what happened. March 15th, 2025, exactly 26 years to the day. I was watching the evening news when my world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of 30 seconds. It's funny how life can change so completely in such a brief moment. One second, you're an old man eating a TV dinner alone in Arizona, and the next second, everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down. I had Channel 12 News on same as every evening at 6 o'clock. The anchor was talking about some political scandal in Washington when the screen suddenly switched to breaking news. The red banner across the bottom read, "Breaking FBI arrests major crime figure in Las Vegas." I wasn't paying much attention at first. Crime stories from Vegas were nothing new, but then they showed the footage of the arrest and my heart stopped beating. There he was, older, his dark hair now silver gray, his face harder and more angular than I remembered. But those eyes, those were still my son's eyes. Max was being led out of what looked like an expensive hotel in handcuffs, surrounded by FBI agents and flashing cameras. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, hot liquid splashing across my slippers, but I barely noticed. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly work the remote to turn up the volume. Max Montrose, 50 years old, has been missing from Ohio since 1999, the reporter was saying. Federal agents say he's been operating a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise under multiple false identities for over 2 decades. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of my kitchen table to keep from falling over. My son, my missing son, wasn't missing at all. He was a criminal, a wanted man. The boy I'd been searching for, praying for, grieving for all these years, had been alive and building some kind of empire built on crime. I fumbled for my phone and dialed the FBI hotline number that appeared on the screen. My fingers could barely hit the right numbers. Federal Bureau of Investigation, how can I help you? The man you arrested, I stammered. Max Montrose. I'm his father. There was a pause. Hold please, sir. After what felt like hours, a different voice came on the line. This is Agent Jenkins. You said you're related to the suspect. He's my son. He disappeared from our ranch in Ohio 26 years ago today. We filed missing person reports, searched everywhere. I never stopped looking for him. Another pause. Sir, this individual has no family on record. According to our investigation, he's been using false identities since at least 2000. There's no indication he has any living relatives. I'm telling you, I'm his father, Jasper Montrose. My wife Jasmine and I reported him missing in March of 1999. You can check the records with the county sheriff in Ohio. Agent Jenkins sounded skeptical, but professional. If what you're saying is true, sir, this is significant. Would you be willing to come to Nevada for identification purposes as soon as possible? He's being held at the Federal Correctional Institution pending trial. I can arrange a meeting. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at Max's photo on the table. The smiling young man in the picture looked nothing like the hard-faced criminal I'd seen on television. Somewhere between leaving our ranch that morning and building whatever empire the FBI had just torn down, my son had become a stranger. But he was still my son. 2 hours later, I was in my old Toyota, driving through the desert night toward Nevada. I was about to face the son I'd lost and the stranger he'd become. The visiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. 26 years of searching hadn't prepared me for what I saw in my son's eyes. I'd imagined this moment countless times. The reunion, the explanations, maybe even forgiveness. But nothing could have prepared me for the cold emptiness that stared back at me through that reinforced glass. Max walked in wearing orange prison scrubs, his hands cuffed in front of him. The guard uncuffed him and pointed to the chair across from mine. We were separated by thick glass with small holes for speaking like a bank teller's window, designed for criminals instead of customers. He sat down without looking at me directly. When he finally raised his eyes, I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. Max, I said, my voice cracking. Son, I never stopped looking for you. He picked up the black phone on his side of the glass with the casual indifference of someone ordering coffee. I know, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I made sure you'd waste your entire life doing it. The words hit me like a physical blow. Why did you leave us? Your mother died waiting for you to come home. Something flickered across his face, not sadness or regret, but something that looked almost like satisfaction. Good. That pathetic woman finally did something useful. Saved me the trouble of telling her the truth myself. What truth? Max leaned forward slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a flash of the boy I'd raised. But when he spoke, his voice was pure poison. That I never loved either of you. You weren't my family. You were just convenient. A place to sleep and eat until I could figure out how to escape. But we loved you. We gave you everything we had. I stared at this man who looked like my son but spoke like a sociopath. The Max I raised wouldn't say these things. He had a good heart. The Max you raised never existed, he replied coldly. I've been planning my escape for months before I left. You were too stupid and sentimental to see what was right in front of you. My voice broke as I tried again. Your mother kept your room exactly the same. She talked to your picture every night, praying you'd come home. Max's eyes lit up with cruel amusement. How pathetic. Did she cry herself to sleep too? I hope so. I hope she suffered every single day. She loved you more than her own life. Then she was an idiot. Just like you, old man. Did you really think I cared about either of you? You were nothing but obstacles I had to tolerate. But the memories, the times we played catch the fishing trips. Boring. Every second with you people was agony. I used to fantasize about never seeing your faces again. Tears were streaming down my cheeks now. We were your parents. We would have died for you. You should have. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. Do you know how many times I watched the news laughing at you searching for me, 26 years of your miserable life, wasted on someone who never wanted to be found? The private investigators, the flyers, all those people who helped us. All fools, just like you. I made sure to cover my tracks so well that you'd spend decades chasing ghosts. It was entertaining watching you destroy yourselves over nothing. My heart was breaking all over again. But why? What did we do wrong? Max smiled. Then the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. It was filled with pure malice. You existed. That was enough. That's when something inside me finally broke. Not my heart. That had been breaking for 26 years. Something deeper. The last thread connecting me to the boy I thought I'd raised. I stood up slowly, my old bones creaking. Max watched me with mild curiosity like I was a mildly interesting television show. You're right about one thing, I said, placing my hand against the glass. The Max I loved never existed, and you're not my son. I hung up the phone and walked out of that prison without looking back. The drive back to Arizona took 8 hours. I didn't stop except for gas. When I got home, I went straight to the closet where I'd kept a box of Max's things all these years. His high school yearbook, some old baseball cards, a few photographs from when he was young and still had light in his eyes. I loaded it all into my car and drove to the nearest Goodwill donation center. That evening, I called my old neighbor back in Ohio. "Martha," I said when she answered, "I'm finally ready to come home. I buried my son in my heart that day." Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. Looking back on this true story, I've learned that love doesn't always guarantee loyalty. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. But I've also learned that healing comes not from holding on to pain, but from knowing when to let go. These betrayal stories teach us hard truths about human nature. Not every missing person wants to be found. Not every family bond is real. Sometimes what we think is love is just manipulation, and what we call home might be prison to someone else. I pray to God that no other parent has to walk this path. 26 years I searched, believing that family meant something sacred. But God has a way of showing us truth, even when it breaks our hearts. Through His grace, I found the strength to finally bury the son who never existed and embrace the peace I'd been denying myself. This true story isn't just mine. It belongs to every parent who's loved unconditionally, only to discover that love wasn't returned. These betrayal stories remind us that sometimes the greatest act of faith is accepting what we cannot change. If this true story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about your own experiences with family love or forgiveness. Your story might be exactly what another broken parent needs to read today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real stories that matter. Sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most beautiful healing. May God watch over all the searching parents out there. You are not alone.